Okay, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're plunging into something really fundamental, this ancient human ambition, biological immortality.
Yeah, not just, living on in memory or stories.
Exactly. We're talking literally sidestepping death, physically holding time at bay.
It's a concept that's fascinated us, well, forever, hasn't it? Since the very first stories.
Totally.
Think about the earliest myths, dreams of eternal youth, the whole alchemist thing with the elixir of life.
Right.
It's like the ultimate expression of wanting to defy our biological limits.
Absolutely. We've dreamed about it, written about it endlessly, and now, well, science is pouring massive resources into it. Gerontology, genetic engineering, actively trying to figure out how to extend lifespan dramatically. It's deeply embedded in us.
And that whole history, that really fundamental human desire that creates the perfect soil, I guess, for the theory we're looking at today.
Exactly. Because the source material we're diving into, it takes that timeless dream and just flips it on its head with an incredibly unsettling claim. The core idea isn't that immortality is something we might achieve someday with science.
No.
It's that the secret, it's already been cracked.
And crucially, not by everyone.
Right.
By a hidden, clandestine few. Individuals who, according to this theory, are walking among us right now, ageless, undetected.
This is the absolute heart of the Immortals among us conspiracy theory that our sources really dig into.
Yeah.
They paint this picture of a secret cabal, maybe thousands of years old, potentially influencing, maybe even guiding human history from the shadows.
It's a powerful narrative, a dark one.
Definitely.
And our mission here in this deep dive is really to unpack that narrative, all of it. We want to look at where this idea comes from, explore the so-called evidence that proponents point to, and, critically examine the counter-arguments.
And crucially, try to understand why. Why does this theory, despite, let's face it, a lack of conventional proof, why does it resonate so profoundly with people?
Exactly.
So get ready. This is a deep dive into an idea as old as our dreams and maybe as unnerving as our deepest fears.
Okay, so let's start by grounding ourselves in that history you mentioned, because what our source material makes really clear is that this quest for eternal life, it isn't some, fringe modern thing. It's truly part of our collective consciousness.
Right. You look at the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Maybe the oldest written story we actually have.
Uh-huh.
It's all about Gilgamesh's desperate search for immortality after his friend Enkidu dies. It's right there at the very dawn of recorded thought.
And then you have myths just scattered across cultures, the Greek gods and their ambrosia, the fountain of youth, figures like Methuselah in the Bible with these seemingly impossible lifespans. These aren't just simple stories, they reflect this constant human preoccupation with, transcending death.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how many of these myths frame immortality not as something for everyone, but as a divine gift or a secret, maybe a reward for heroes. Mortals who tried to steal it. They often faced pretty severe consequences.
Yeah.
Which feels very relevant to that exclusive club idea in the theory we're looking at.
It absolutely does. It sets up immortality as a privilege, right? A source of power, something separate from ordinary human life. Alchemists, later on, they chased the same idea, didn't they? With the elixir of life.
Which brings us kind of full circle to today, because the modern equivalents are happening in labs right now.
Exactly.
Researchers looking into gene editing, cellular regeneration, all these ways to potentially halt or even reverse aging.
Precisely. So you have that long history of the dream combined with modern science, which is, making some headway against the problems of aging.
Right.
And that creates this really fertile ground. It makes the idea of someone already having cracked it feel, to some people, less like pure fantasy and maybe more like a secret breakthrough.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. The dream is ancient, the pursuit is ongoing. Now let's get to that core, really unsettling claim that dominates our source material.
Yeah.
The idea that true biological immortality isn't some future hope for humanity, but a present hidden reality, held by a secret elite.
Yes, and the sources describe this not just as, living a really long time, but genuine agelessness, maintaining youth vitality indefinitely. This isn't just slowing down aging, it's fundamentally bypassing the biological rules as we know them.
Wow.
They could be regenerating, maybe controlling their physical appearance, perhaps even immune to normal diseases.
And who are these supposed immortals?
Yeah.
When you look across the source material, a few common candidates seem to pop up.
Right.
A frequent one is ancient bloodlines. These incredibly powerful families, often tied to historical aristocracy or banking dynasties, even alleged mystical lineages, who've supposedly held this secret knowledge for centuries, passing it down generation to generation.
And what's striking about that claim, as the sources present it, is that their sustained influence, their wealth across millennia, is attributed directly to this extended lifespan. It's not just building generational wealth in the normal way. They're playing an incredibly long game, accumulating knowledge, power, continuously, lifetime after lifetime.
Other versions of the theory point to secret societies, things like variations on the Illuminati or certain esoteric orders, portrayed as the keepers of this ultimate secret, only granting it to their absolute elite members.
And some sources even venture into, well, ancient aliens territory, suggesting the Immortals are maybe hybrids, or they were gifted this longevity by extraterrestrials for some unknown purpose.
Or in a more modern twist, it's claimed some radical transhumanist group quietly made the breakthrough, completely outside the public eye.
Yeah.
Okay, so that covers who they might be, according to the theory. But the really wild part is how. How did they supposedly do it? The claims here are they're all over the map, blending ancient myths with really futuristic concepts.
They absolutely are. I mean, the sources mention everything from finding mythical elixirs or artifacts back in ancient times to possessing incredibly advanced technology, maybe genetic manipulation we can't even imagine, or even, alien-derived methods.
So it's not just one single method. The theory kind of accommodates various explanations, magic potions and super science.
Precisely. And you get esoteric interpretations too, sometimes bringing in spiritual or occult practices.
Like what?
Maintaining existence through non-physical means, maybe even transferring consciousness somehow.
Wow.
And yes, some of the darker versions, they definitely mention things like cloning or even body hopping.
Okay, body hopping. That's profoundly disturbing.
It is, implying they aren't immortal in just one body, but they move their minds, their consciousness, into new, younger versions when the old one wears out or gets compromised.
Which brings up the obvious question. If you had this incredible gift, why on earth would you hide it?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you share it?
Yeah.
And the theory is very, very clear on this point. They wouldn't.
And the sources lay out what they claim are several, pretty chilling motives for keeping it secret.
Okay.
The primary driver, absolute power. Makes sense, right? An immortal elite can accumulate just unparalleled knowledge, wealth, influence over millennia.
Simply outliving and outmaneuvering any mortal opposition.
Exactly.
Resource control is another huge one mentioned.
The theory suggests that if everyone became immortal, the planet's resources would just vanish instantly, leading to collapse.
So by keeping immortality exclusive, the elite ensures their own perpetual comfort and control.
Right. And this often ties into darker narratives about things like depopulation as a way to manage resources just for the few.
Preventing mass panic is also cited, right? Societal collapse.
Definitely. Imagine the sudden revelation. It could trigger religious upheaval, economic chaos, maybe even violent backlash against them. Keeping humanity mortal and therefore manageable is seen as essential for their stable control.
And there's that truly sinister possibility, which some sources bring up.
Yeah.
That they might still be, refining their process, maybe using unsuspecting mortals as test subjects somehow.
Yeah. Avoiding moral scrutiny is also key.
Makes sense.
A mortal ruling class just raises devastating ethical questions. Fairness, equality, who gets to live forever? Their hidden existence lets them sidestep all of that.
So ultimately it boils down to possessing the ultimate asymmetric advantage in every sphere, geopolitical, economic, technological.
Even biological, the ultimate advantage.
Okay, so we have the ancient dream, this chilling claim of a hidden elite, and their supposed motives tied to power and control. Now let's talk about the evidence. How do proponents of this theory actually try to convince you that this isn't just, science fiction? Our sources detail some intriguing points, though. Let's be clear, highly debatable ones.
Yes, this is where the theory points to perceived patterns, coincidences, historical anomalies, presenting them as clues hidden in plain sight.
Okay.
One major piece of evidence they often cite is this idea of historical figures reappearing.
Ah, like the Count of Saint-Germain. He's a classic example you see in these sources.
Yeah, absolutely. 18th century courtier, composer, alleged alchemist.
Right.
Who was rumored, even in his own time, to be immortal, never seemed to age, spoke multiple languages fluently, had this vast historical knowledge that seemed impossible for his apparent age.
And in our modern digital age, this claim manifests as those uncanny resemblances you see circulating online all the time.
Mm-hmm. Photos comparing modern celebrities or figures to historical portraits, claiming they're actually the same immortal individual, just under a new identity.
You've definitely seen them. Photos suggesting Keanu Reeves looks exactly like some historical figure.
Or Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage resembling a Civil War soldier, Or even photos claiming Vladimir Putin appeared in old pictures from like a century ago.
And the theory says these aren't just uncanny lookalikes.
No.
It's the same immortal individual reappearing through history.
Or they point to public figures who seem to age incredibly slowly.
Right. Their sustained youth, their vitality, it's viewed with suspicion, attributed not to good genes or lifestyle or, cosmetic surgery.
No, it's got to be a secret rejuvenation process.
Exactly, according to the theory.
Another area the sources cite involves the unexplained or maybe disproportionate wealth and power of certain long-standing families or institutions.
Right. Families like the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers, for instance, their consistent, immense wealth and influence spanning centuries. That's seen by proponents as evidence of continuous immortal guidance within those family lines. They argue only immortals could play such a successful long game across generations.
Their apparent foresight, predicting economic shifts, political changes, consistently profiting, that's linked not to shrewd analysis, but to their vast historical experience, perspective gained over millennia.
And beyond just individuals and families, the theory often points to the alleged suppression of radical scientific breakthroughs.
Okay. Especially in anti-aging research.
Exactly, or even things like clean energy technologies.
The idea being, if a scientist gets too close to developing tech that could truly extend life for everyone, or provide abundant free energy that undermines resource scarcity.
Which hits the immortals' key motives for secrecy.
Right, they get silenced. Disappearing scientists, unexplained lab fires, revolutionary patents filed but never commercialized.
All presented as proof of this massive cover-up. And in some of the more, let's say, extreme or esoteric versions, the sources touch on theories involving hidden underground bases, or secret societies engaging in dark rituals, maybe even involving human sacrifice or consuming rare biological materials to maintain their eternal existence. Pretty grim stuff.
Definitely grim. Finally, they point to historical records, right? Those mentions of long-lived individuals in ancient texts.
Yeah, those seemingly exaggerated lifespans you find in places like the Bible or the Sumerian king lists. They're interpreted not as myth or metaphor, but as fragmented, maybe misunderstood, accounts of real immortals who walked the earth long ago, who perhaps later got mythologized.
And the very fact that legends of immortality exist in virtually every human culture.
That's seen as truth in myth.
Right. Maybe ancient societies actually encountered these beings and wove them into their foundational stories.
Okay. That is quite a list of claims, alleged clues. It paints a very specific, very strange picture.
It really does. But what happens when we turn to the scientific, historical, and logical perspective, which thankfully our sources also include? What does reality say?
Well, this is where the narrative shifts dramatically. What's absolutely clear from the mainstream perspective presented in the sources is how easily these claims can generally be explained by conventional understanding.
Okay.
The most fundamental challenge to the theory is just basic biology. Biological impossibility, at least according to everything we currently understand about life.
Aging isn't just one simple process you can, switch off, right?
Not at all. Our bodies are basically built to age. Damage accumulates at a fundamental cellular, molecular level over time. Even if you solved one piece, say, telomere shortening, there are countless other complex processes leading to decay, senescence, and eventually system failure.
And even putting aging aside for a second, there are things like fatal accidents, physical trauma,
right,
or the constant evolution of new diseases. The idea that any biological being could just exist for thousands of years, completely immune to all potential forms of destruction. It seems wildly improbable.
And let's be blunt, probably the most significant hurdle is the complete, utter lack of verifiable empirical evidence.
Nothing solid.
There is simply no credible record anywhere of a human living beyond the maximum documented lifespan, which is around 122 years. All the claims in the theory, they're based on interpretation, anecdotes, alleged secrets, zero solid proof.
Which brings us back to those uncanny resemblances, the evidence that maybe captures people's imagination the most.
Yeah, the photos.
Are they proof? Or is there another explanation?
Well, the sources point out these can be overwhelmingly explained by phenomena we understand pretty well. Pareidolia is a big one.
Our brain's tendency to see patterns, especially faces, even in random data, like seeing a face in the clouds.
Exactly, and think about genetic chance. Human facial features are based on a limited set of genetic variations. It's actually statistically highly probable that people born centuries apart with absolutely no relation will share remarkably similar features just by chance.
You also have the issue of artistic style in historical portraits, right?
Many portraits of different people from the same era might look similar because they were painted using the same techniques, the same stylistic conventions.
Potentially making distinct individuals look more alike than they actually were.
And frankly, as the sources acknowledge, many of the side-by-side photos you see circulating online are simply hoaxes.
Or misidentified people.
Or Photoshop images created specifically to fuel this theory.
Right. Okay, what about the long-standing wealth and power of certain families? The Rothschilds, Rockefeller's example.
Well, our sources provide pretty conventional explanations for that too. It's thoroughly accounted for by inherited capital, shrewd long-term investments,
Strategic political connections.
powerful social networks built over generations, and just the simple compounding effect of wealth and influence being passed down.
So powerful entities do play a long game. That part's true.
Absolutely. But it's achieved through successive generations of intelligent leaders, careful planning, accumulated resources, not the continuous presence of a single immortal person.
And the supposed suppression of research. How do the sources explain that?
Mostly through the messy reality of scientific progress and, well, market dynamics.
Okay.
Most revolutionary research fails. It fails due to technical hurdles, lack of funding, ethical issues, or just inconclusive results. It happens all the time.
And most patents never actually make it to market because they aren't economically viable, or they aren't scalable, or they just don't work as well as hoped.
Exactly. Not because of some deliberate, shadowy cover-up. And tragically, scientists, like anyone else, die from natural causes, accidents, illness, attributing every death of a researcher working on longevity or energy to a vast immortal conspiracy. That's a classic example of apophenia.
Seeing meaningful connections and patterns in random or unrelated data.
Precisely.
How do scholars usually interpret those ancient, exaggerated lifespans in old texts?
Universally, really, they're understood within their historical and cultural context. They're interpreted as symbolic or metaphorical, or part of mythological traditions meant to convey concepts like divine favor, or a lost golden age.
Okay.
Or maybe the vastness of time before a known historical period, not literal biological history. Plus, ancient methods of tracking time and age weren't standardized like ours.
And finally, maybe one of the most compelling logical counterarguments is just the sheer impossibility of keeping such a massive secret for millennia.
This is a huge point. Think about it. Maintaining the secret of biological immortality for thousands of years.
Through countless cultures, wars, revolutions.
Rise of global communication, the internet.
All without a single verifiable leak.
No deathbed confessions, no disgruntled ex-members spilling the beans.
No accidental photographic slip-ups that couldn't be easily explained away. No physical evidence ever emerging. It just seems logistically impossible.
It would require the perfect, absolute silence of thousands, maybe millions of individuals over vast stretches of time, with zero deviation.
Highly improbable. And the sources also highlight that believing this theory can often be explained by fundamental psychological biases we all have.
Right. Confirmation bias is a big one, where you look for and interpret information in a way that confirms what you already believe.
Or the desire for meaning and order in what feels like a chaotic, uncertain world.
The inherent appeal of forbidden or hidden knowledge is strong, too.
And perhaps most powerfully, that profound and universal human fear of death.
Yeah, the idea that someone else has beaten death, even if you can't. It provides a strange sort of framework, I guess, for confronting that fear.
So despite all these very solid counterarguments, rooted in science and logic, our sources also explore why. Why does this theory continue to capture imaginations? Why does it hold such powerful, enduring appeal for so many people?
Well, it taps directly into some of our deepest human vulnerabilities and desires. There's the obvious one we just mentioned, the primal fear of death. contrasted with that tantalizing dream of immortality. The idea that the solution exists but is being hoarded by some elite group. That's incredibly potent and unsettling.
It also serves as a perfect embodiment of anxiety about extreme inequality, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It paints the ultimate have versus have-not scenario, where the divide isn't just wealth or power, but life itself.
And that resonates powerfully, especially in times of growing economic and social disparities. It fuels distrust of those at the very top.
It reinforces a pervasive sense that authority figures aren't just fallible, but potentially corrupt and self-serving to an almost unimaginable degree.
Willing to take the most extreme measures to maintain their position.
Exactly.
And for many people, it provides a simple, kind of compelling explanation for things that seem confusing or resistant to change.
Like what?
Like, why do certain power structures seem so resilient across generations? Why do certain families stay influential for centuries despite massive shifts in society? Why does fundamental societal change feel so agonizingly slow sometimes?
The theory offers an answer. The Immortals don't want things to change.
Because they're eternal and invested in the status quo they control.
Right. There's also the significant allure of forbidden knowledge we touched on.
Yeah.
The idea that there's a secret history, a hidden reality known only to a select few. That's incredibly attractive, especially to those who feel disillusioned with mainstream narratives or believe they can perceive truths others miss.
And let's be honest, there's just the sheer what-if factor.
Oh, definitely.
The implications of this theory, if it were true, are so immense, so mind-bending, that just contemplating the possibility is inherently captivating.
What if some figures influencing history have lived for centuries? How would that fundamentally rewrite everything we think we know about the past and the present? And finally, the sources point out there's often a kind of psychological conflation going on.
How so?
The immense, long-standing wealth and power of certain groups is just so far beyond average human experience that it feels unnatural. And that feeling gets intuitively, though maybe illogically, linked to the most unnatural possibility imaginable, an unnatural extension of life itself.
Right, so this deep dive into the Immortals Among Us conspiracy theory, it's really shown us how humanity's timeless dream of eternal life can get twisted.
Yeah, into a narrative of a terrifying, hidden secret.
It proposes that this secret cabal has achieved biological immortality, or at least extreme longevity.
Silently guiding human history, consolidating power, hoarding the ultimate secret to life, while the rest of us just remain bound by time.
As we've explored, proponents point to things like uncanny resemblances, unexplained wealth, suppressed science as alleged evidence.
But mainstream science, history, and just basic logic offer compelling counter-arguments, providing conventional explanations grounded in known biological limits, statistical probability.
Historical reality, psychological biases.
Exactly. Yet this idea persists, doesn't it?
It really does.
It taps into our most fundamental fears, our anxieties about inequality, that deep-seated distrust of power.
It offers a potent, albeit unsupported, framework for interpreting historical patterns and the apparent resilience of certain power structures.
So here is the thought presented in the sources for you to consider after this deep dive.
When you observe the enduring influence of certain groups or individuals, when you see someone who seems to, defy the typical passage of time or the norms of aging.
Are you simply witnessing the expected results of conventional success? Good genetics, accumulated generational power, maybe access to the best modern healthcare?
Or could you, just possibly, be witnessing a fleeting, obscured sign, a sign of an immortal being operating from the deep shadows of history?
The sources show that idea, captivating and unsettling as it is, well, it isn't going away anytime soon.
Leaving the question open for you.